I never thought buying my dream house in Scottsdale, Arizona would turn into a legal nightmare, but when I watched the security footage of my HOA president backing her SUV straight into our shared fence, I knew things were about to get messy. My name is Nathan Fletcher, and I had just moved into the Sagebrush Hills community 3 months earlier. The house was perfect, a modern, desert-style home with mountain views, a pool, and what I thought would be friendly neighbors. The HOA seemed reasonable during the home tour. Just your standard rules about lawn maintenance and exterior paint colors. I should have known better when the real estate agent grimaced slightly at the mention of the HOA president's name. Brenda Morrison was her name, and within the first week, she had already left 2 notices on my door. One complained that my trash cans were visible from the street for approximately 45 minutes past the designated time on collection day. The other cited me for having a welcome mat that was burgundy instead of the approved earth tone palette. I thought she was being overly particular, but I changed the mat and made sure to be more careful with the trash schedule. I wanted to be a good neighbor. The fence in question sat on the property line between my backyard and the common area that led to the community park. According to the HOA documents, it was a shared responsibility fence, meaning both the homeowner and the HOA split maintenance costs 50-50. It was a nice fence too, 6 feet of cedar wood with decorative caps, probably worth around $4,000 to replace. I had installed security cameras around my property the second week after moving in. Not because I expected trouble, but because I traveled for work sometimes and wanted to keep an eye on things. I had cameras covering the front door, driveway, side gates, and the backyard. The backyard camera had a clear view of that shared fence. It was a Tuesday morning in late March when my phone buzzed with a motion alert from the backyard camera. I was in my home office working on a project proposal when I glanced at the notification. The footage showed Brenda's white Cadillac Escalade backing up along the common area, clearly going too fast. I watched in real time as she overcorrected, swerved, and slammed directly into the fence. The impact was substantial. At least 15 feet of fencing collapsed, posts snapping and boards splintering. I stood up from my desk and walked to the back window. Sure enough, there was Brenda, climbing out of her SUV, looking around frantically. She pulled out her phone, took several pictures of the damage, then got back in her vehicle and drove away. She never knocked on my door. She never left a note. She just left. I saved the footage immediately to 3 different locations: my computer, an external hard drive, and cloud storage. Something told me I would need it. That evening, I went outside to inspect the damage up close. The fence was destroyed. Splintered wood lay scattered across my yard and the common area. 2 posts were completely broken at the base, and another 3 were cracked and leaning. It would definitely need to be replaced, not just repaired. I was standing there taking my own photos when my neighbor from the other side, an older gentleman named Robert Chen, walked over. "That's some damage," he said, shaking his head. "What happened?" "Brenda backed into it this morning," I replied. "I have it on camera." Robert's eyebrows shot up. "You have it on camera? Oh boy. Did she stop and talk to you about it?" "Nope. She took some pictures and left." He let out a low whistle. "Nathan, let me give you some advice. Document everything. Brenda has a way of twisting situations to benefit herself in the HOA budget. Last year, she tried to charge the Hendersons for water damage to the community fountain, claimed their sprinklers caused it. Turned out it was a crack in the fountain's own plumbing, but they still had to hire a lawyer to fight it." "Seriously?" "Dead serious. She runs this HOA like her own personal kingdom. She has been president for 6 years, and people are too intimidated to run against her." I thanked Robert for the warning and went back inside. I made copies of the video footage and started a folder on my computer labeled Fence Incident. Something told me this was going to escalate. I was right. The next morning, I found an official-looking envelope tucked into my doorframe. Inside was a letter on HOA letterhead signed by Brenda Morrison in her capacity as HOA president. The letter informed me that damage had occurred to the shared fence on my property line, and that per the HOA covenant's conditions and restrictions, I was responsible for 50% of the repair costs. However, the letter went on to say that, upon investigation, it appeared the fence damage was caused by negligent installation of an irrigation system on my property, which had allegedly weakened the posts. Therefore, I was being held 100% responsible for the replacement cost, estimated at $4,500. I had 30 days to complete the repairs using an HOA-approved contractor or face fines of $100 per day. I read the letter 3 times. Irrigation system? I had not touched the irrigation system. The previous owners had installed it years ago, and it worked fine. More importantly, an irrigation system would not cause a fence to suddenly collapse, especially not in the exact spot where an SUV had slammed into it at high speed. I immediately called the number listed on the HOA letter. A woman answered on the third ring. Sagebrush Hills HOA, this is Debbie. Hi Debbie, this is Nathan Fletcher from 4782 Desert Willow Drive. I just received a letter about the fence damage, and I need to speak with Brenda Morrison. Oh yes, she mentioned you might call. She is actually not available right now. She asked me to tell you that all communications regarding this matter need to be in writing and submitted through the HOA portal. In writing? Debbie, this is about a fence that Brenda herself backed into yesterday morning. I have video footage of the entire incident. There was a pause. I don't know anything about that, Mr. Fletcher. I just handle the administrative paperwork. You will need to submit your response in writing. I hung up frustrated. This was clearly a pattern. Brenda was trying to control the narrative by forcing everything through official channels where she could document her version of events. I spent the next 2 hours writing a detailed response. I described exactly what had happened, noted the timestamps from my security footage, and offered to provide copies of the video to the HOA board. I stated clearly that I would not be paying for damage that Brenda caused and that the HOA should either cover the full cost or split it as originally agreed, with Brenda personally responsible for the HOA's portion since she caused the damage. I submitted the response through the HOA portal and sent a copy via certified mail. Then I called 3 different fence contractors to get estimates. All of them quoted between $4,000 and $5,000 for a complete replacement of the damaged section. For 2 weeks, I heard nothing. The broken fence sat there, and I got increasingly worried that Brenda would try to fine me for the unsightly damage that she had caused. I sent a follow-up email asking for a response. Nothing then. On a Friday afternoon, I received another certified letter. This one informed me that the HOA board had reviewed my claim and found it without merit. The letter stated that no evidence supported the allegation that HOA President Morrison caused the damage, and that I remained fully responsible for the repairs. Furthermore, because I had now missed the 30-day deadline, I was being fined $100 per day starting immediately. The letter also threatened to place a lien on my property if the fines went unpaid. I felt my blood pressure rise as I read. This was insane. I had video evidence and they were just dismissing it without even looking at it. I called Robert Chen, figuring he might have dealt with something similar. Nathan, this is exactly what I warned you about, he said when I explained the situation. Brenda stacks the HOA board with people who will not question her. There are 5 board members total and 3 of them are her friends from her book club. They rubber stamp whatever she wants. So what do? You need a lawyer. I am serious. This is not something you can handle by just being reasonable. Brenda will drag this out, pile up fines, and eventually force you to either pay or fight it in court. You might as well get ahead of it now. I hated that it had come to this. I had been in the house for less than 4 months, and I was already looking at hiring an attorney to fight my own HOA. But Robert was right. This was not going to resolve itself. I started researching HOA attorneys in the Scottsdale area. I found a firm called Desert Property Law Group that specialized in HOA disputes. Their website featured several case studies about homeowners who had successfully fought overreaching HOA boards. I called and made an appointment for the following Monday. The attorney I met with was a sharp woman in her 40s named Jennifer Portman. She listened to my entire story, watched the security footage on her laptop, and reviewed all the correspondence between me and the HOA. This is pretty straightforward, she said, leaning back in her chair. You have clear video evidence showing that Ms. Morrison caused the damage. The HOA cannot legally hold you responsible for damage someone else caused, especially when that someone is the HOA president acting in her capacity overseeing common areas. The attempt to blame it on your irrigation system is completely fabricated, and we can prove that with an independent inspection. So what are my options? We send a demand letter to the HOA and to Brenda Morrison personally. We lay out the facts, provide a copy of the video evidence, and demand that they immediately cease all fines and either repair the fence themselves or reimburse you for repairs you have completed. We give them 10 days to respond. If they refuse or ignore us, we file a lawsuit. How much is this going to cost me? Jennifer gave me a sympathetic look. I will be honest with you, Nathan. HOA cases can get expensive if they drag on. But in a case like this, where the evidence is this clear-cut, we can usually negotiate a quick settlement. I would estimate you are looking at maybe $2,000 to $3,000 in legal fees if it settles quickly, potentially more if it goes to actual litigation. However, we can request that the HOA pay your attorney fees as part of the settlement, which is common in cases where the HOA is clearly in the wrong. It was not ideal, but I did not see another choice. Let's do it. Jennifer drafted the demand letter that afternoon. It was 5 pages of legal language that essentially said, "We have you on camera. You are liable for the damage. Stop harassing my client immediately." She sent it via certified mail and email to Brenda personally, to the HOA board collectively, and to the HOA's registered agent. I thought that would be the end of it. Surely, when faced with video evidence and an attorney, Brenda would back down. I was wrong. 3 days later, I received yet another letter from the HOA. This one informed me that I was being fined an additional $500 for harassment of HOA leadership and frivolous legal threats. The daily fines for the offense continued to accrue. I forwarded the letter to Jennifer immediately. She called me within an hour, and I could hear the anger in her voice. "This is retaliation, plain and simple. They are trying to intimidate you into dropping your claim. It is actually going to make our case stronger because retaliatory fines are illegal under Arizona HOA law. We are filing the lawsuit today." Today? Today, this has gone far enough. I am also going to request a temporary restraining order to stop them from placing a lien on your property while the case is pending. The lawsuit was filed in Maricopa County Superior Court that afternoon. Jennifer sued both the Sagebrush Hills HOA and Brenda Morrison personally, alleging breach of the HOA covenants, negligence, fraud, and retaliation. We requested damages to cover the fence repair, all legal fees, removal of all fines, and compensation for emotional distress. The local process server delivered the lawsuit papers to Brenda 2 days later. I was not there to see her reaction, but I wished I could have been. What I did not expect was how quickly things would escalate in the neighborhood. Within a week of the lawsuit being filed, I started noticing increased hostility from certain neighbors. One morning, I found dog feces on my driveway, despite the fact that I did not own a dog. Another time, someone egged my mailbox. My next-door neighbor, a woman named Patricia who was on the HOA board, stopped acknowledging me entirely when we crossed paths. Robert Chen kept me updated on the gossip. Apparently, Brenda was telling everyone that I was a troublemaker trying to destroy the HOA over a minor fence dispute. She conveniently left out the part where she had caused the damage and tried to blame me for it. She is rallying her supporters. Robert told me over coffee one Saturday morning. She sent an email to the whole neighborhood painting you as the villain. I saved a copy if you want to see it. He forwarded it to me. The email was masterfully manipulative. Brenda wrote about how she had dedicated years of volunteer service to making Sagebrush Hills a beautiful community, and now one homeowner was threatening to bankrupt the HOA with a frivolous lawsuit over a simple fence. She claimed that if she lost the case, everyone's HOA dues would skyrocket to cover the legal fees. She painted herself as the victim, a hard-working volunteer being attacked by an entitled homeowner who refused to take responsibility for his property. I forwarded the email to Jennifer. Can she do this? She can say whatever she wants, but she is digging herself deeper. This email is evidence of her trying to turn the community against you, which supports our retaliation claim. Save everything she sends. The court date for the temporary restraining order hearing was set for 3 weeks out. In the meantime, Jennifer hired an independent fence inspector to examine both the damaged fence and my irrigation system. The inspector's report was damning for Brenda's case. He found no evidence that the irrigation system had weakened the posts, and based on the pattern of damage, he concluded that the fence had suffered a significant horizontal impact consistent with a vehicle collision. His report even noted paint transfer on one of the broken boards that matched the color of a white vehicle. Can we get paint from her Escalade to compare? I asked Jennifer. We will request it in discovery, but honestly, we do not even need it. The video is enough. But having the inspector's report helps shut down their irrigation system nonsense. The restraining order hearing arrived. I took the morning off work and met Jennifer at the courthouse. Brenda showed up with the HOA's attorney, a tired-looking man in an ill-fitting suit named Gary Stevens. The hearing was held in a small courtroom with just the judge, the attorneys, Brenda, and me. The judge was a no-nonsense woman named Patricia Ramirez, who looked like she had heard every excuse in the book. Jennifer presented our case efficiently. She played the security footage on a laptop, showed the inspector's report, and walked through the timeline of Brenda's increasingly aggressive retaliation. When it was the HOA's turn, their attorney argued that the video was unclear and could have been doctored. Judge Ramirez stopped him mid-sentence. "Counselor, I just watched a video of a white Cadillac Escalade backing into a fence at high speed. The driver got out, looked at the damage, and left. Are you seriously arguing that this video is fake?" Gary Stevens fumbled with his papers. "Your Honor, we have reason to believe the timestamp may not be accurate, and the footage does not definitively show who was driving the vehicle." Jennifer stood. "Your Honor, we can provide the original video file with metadata showing the date, time, and camera information. We can also subpoena the DMV records showing that Ms. Morrison owns a white Cadillac Escalade with the license plate visible in the footage. This is not a question of evidence quality. The evidence is clear. The HOA is simply refusing to accept responsibility." Judge Ramirez looked at Brenda directly. "Morrison, is that your vehicle in the video?" Brenda's face flushed red. "Your Honor, I may have been in that area that day, but I do not recall hitting the fence. There was no damage to my vehicle, so I do not believe I made contact." "You do not recall backing into a fence hard enough to knock down 15 feet of it?" "I would have remembered if I had caused significant damage." The judge looked skeptical. "I am granting the temporary restraining order. The HOA is prohibited from placing any liens on Mr. Fletcher's property and from issuing any further fines related to this incident until the case is resolved. We will have a full hearing on the merits in 60 days, Ms. Morrison. I strongly suggest you and your attorney review that video very carefully and consider whether you want to continue fighting this." We walked out of the courtroom, and I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. At least now I did not have to worry about losing my house over fraudulent fines. But Brenda was not done. 2 weeks after the hearing, I came home from a work trip to find a notice taped to my door. This one cited me for 7 different HOA violations. My house number was not properly visible from the street. My landscaping included a non-approved plant species. My garage door had a small dent that violated aesthetic standards. I had not submitted architectural approval for my patio furniture. My front walkway had a crack that needed repair. My exterior light fixtures were not the correct finish, and my rain gutters were slightly discolored. I stood there reading the notice, and I actually laughed. It was so transparent. Brenda was trying to bury me in violations to either force me to drop the lawsuit or to justify her earlier claims that I was a problem homeowner. I took photos of everything she had cited. The house number was perfectly visible. The non-approved plant species was a standard desert sage that appeared in half the yards in the neighborhood. The garage door dent was barely noticeable and had been there when I bought the house. The patio furniture was basic metal chairs. The walkway crack was a hairline fracture less than an inch long. The light fixtures matched dozens of others in the community, and the gutter discoloration was just normal weathering. I sent everything to Jennifer, who added it to our growing case file as further evidence of retaliation. "She is panicking," Jennifer said. "People do not behave this irrationally unless they know they are in trouble. Just ignore these violations. Do not pay any of the fines. We will deal with it all at once in court." As the main hearing date approached, Jennifer sent discovery requests to the HOA, demanding all sorts of documents including minutes from board meetings, financial records, correspondence about the fence, and maintenance records for the common areas. She also formally requested that Brenda produce her vehicle for inspection. The HOA fought every request. Their attorney filed motions to limit discovery, claiming the requests were overly broad and burdensome. Judge Ramirez denied most of their objections and ordered them to comply. When the documents finally arrived, they were revealing. The board meeting minutes showed that Brenda had never informed the other board members about the accident. Instead, she had simply told them that the fence on my property line had collapsed, and that I was refusing to pay for repairs. There was no mention of her involvement. Even more interesting were the financial records. They showed that Brenda had previously submitted reimbursement requests to the HOA for minor damage to her vehicle, including a cracked headlight and a scratched bumper. But there was no reimbursement request after the date of the fence incident. Jennifer believed this was because Brenda knew that submitting such a request would create a paper trail, proving she had damaged something that day. The vehicle inspection was scheduled for a Friday afternoon at a neutral location, a body shop that Jennifer had hired. Brenda's attorney tried to delay it multiple times, but Judge Ramirez finally ordered that if the vehicle was not produced by the deadline, the court would assume the vehicle had evidence of the collision. The Escalade showed up. I was not present for the inspection, but Jennifer called me afterward with the results. The rear bumper has been replaced recently, like within the last 2 months. The body shop confirmed that it is a new part, and the paint does not quite match the rest of the vehicle. Someone did a repair job and not a great one, so she did damage her SUV in the accident and then had it fixed? Exactly, and she never disclosed that. Which means she knew she caused the damage and took active steps to hide the evidence. That is going to look very bad for her in court. I felt a surge of vindication. Everything was coming together. But then things took an unexpected turn. About a week before the scheduled hearing, I received a phone call from a man who introduced himself as James Hendricks, a member of the HOA board. He sounded nervous. "Mr. Fletcher, I hope you do not mind me calling you directly. I got your number from the HOA directory. I wanted to talk to you about the lawsuit." I was immediately suspicious. "I am not supposed to discuss the case without my attorney present." No, I understand. I am not calling on behalf of the HOA officially. I am calling as an individual board member because I think you deserve to know what has been happening." I stayed silent, waiting. "Look, I only joined the board last year because my wife wanted me to get more involved in the community. I have mostly just gone along with what Brenda wanted because she seemed to know what she was doing. But after your lawsuit was filed and I started actually reading the documents and looking at the evidence, I realized that Brenda has been lying to all of us. I tried to tell you that in my response to the HOA," I said. "I know. I am sorry we did not take it seriously. Brenda showed us your letter and said you were just making excuses. She never mentioned that you had video footage. When your attorney's discovery requests came through and I saw the actual video, I was shocked. So what happens now? 3 of us on the board, me, Sandra Yates, and Marcus Turner, we want to settle this case and remove Brenda as president, but she is fighting us. She has convinced Patricia and Linda, the other 2 board members, that settling would be an admission of wrongdoing and would open the HOA up to more lawsuits. She is claiming that you will use this as precedent to sue over everything." I felt a mix of anger and hope. That is ridiculous. I just want the fence fixed and the fines removed. I am not looking to destroy the HOA, I believe you. Listen, we are calling a special board meeting next week to vote on whether to accept a settlement offer if one is proposed. If you and your attorney are willing to put together a reasonable settlement offer, I think we can get 3 votes to accept it, which is enough to pass. That would override Brenda. I told him I would talk to Jennifer and get back to him. Jennifer was cautiously optimistic. Having board members willing to work with us is huge, but we need to be careful. This could be a trap to get us to show our hand before the hearing. Let me draft a settlement offer that is fair but firm. She put together a proposal. The HOA would pay the full cost of repairing the fence, remove all fines from my account, reimburse me for my attorney fees up to that point, which was around $3,000, and issue a written apology clarifying that I was not at fault. In exchange, I would drop the lawsuit and agree not to pursue any further claims related to this incident. Notably, the settlement did not require any action against Brenda personally, though Jennifer told me that would likely be handled internally by the board. We sent the settlement offer to the HOA's attorney and directly to the 3 board members who had indicated they would support it. The special board meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday evening at the community center. It was open to homeowners, so I attended. So did about 30 other neighbors, including Robert Chen. Brenda called the meeting to order and immediately tried to move to a closed executive session to discuss the lawsuit. James Hendricks objected. "I think this matter should be discussed openly. The entire community has been affected by this dispute, and they deserve to know what really happened." Brenda's face tightened. "The lawsuit involves potential liability for the HOA. It would be inappropriate to discuss details in public." Sandra Yates, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes, spoke up. "Brenda, we have all seen the video footage. We know what happened. The question now is whether we accept the settlement offer or continue to spend HOA money fighting a losing battle." A murmur went through the audience. Clearly, not everyone had known about the video. Patricia, one of Brenda's allies, jumped in. "We do not know that it is a losing battle. Our attorney says we have valid defenses. Our attorney also said the temporary restraining order would be denied, and he was wrong about that too," Marcus Turner added. He was a younger guy, probably in his 30s, who looked tired of the whole thing. Brenda slammed her hand on the table. I am still the president of this board, and I will not be bullied into accepting a settlement that sets a dangerous precedent. Mr. Fletcher has been a problem since he moved in, and giving in to his demands will only encourage more homeowners to think they can ignore HOA rules. Robert Chen stood up from the audience. Brenda, I have lived in this community for 12 years. Nathan is not a problem homeowner. You backed into his fence, tried to blame him for it, and have been retaliating against him ever since. I have seen you do similar things to other homeowners. The Hendersons, the Parkers, the Lynns, all of them have dealt with your overreach. It is time someone stood up to you. Several other people in the audience nodded or murmured in agreement. Brenda looked like she had been slapped. That is completely out of line. I have dedicated countless hours to this community, and this is the thanks I get. You dedicated countless hours to micromanaging people and using your position to avoid accountability, Sandra said quietly. I am calling for a vote on the settlement offer. All in favor? Sandra, James, and Marcus raised their hands. Opposed? Brenda and Patricia raised their hands. The motion passes 3-2. We will accept the settlement offer. Brenda stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. Fine. I resign as president, effective immediately. You all can deal with this mess yourselves. She grabbed her purse and stormed out of the community center. Patricia hurried after her. The room was silent for a moment. Then Sandra spoke again. Well, I suppose we need to elect a new president. Does anyone want to nominate someone? James nominated Sandra, who accepted. The vote was unanimous among the 3 remaining board members, with a plan to hold a special election later to fill the 2 empty seats. After the meeting, several neighbors came up to me to apologize for believing Brenda's version of events. Robert clapped me on the shoulder. You did the neighborhood a favor. She has needed to go for years. The settlement was finalized a week later. The HOA paid for a contractor to completely rebuild the damaged fence section. They cut me a check for my attorney fees and issued a formal letter to all homeowners clarifying that the dispute had been resolved and that I had been wrongly blamed for damage I did not cause. The letter did not explicitly name Brenda, but everyone knew what it meant. All the fraudulent fines were removed from my account, and the bogus violations she had cited me for were dismissed. Jennifer filed a notice of dismissal with the court, and the case was closed. But there was one more twist. About a month after everything settled, I received a call from an investigator with the Arizona Department of Real Estate. Apparently, after Brenda's resignation became public knowledge, several other homeowners had filed complaints alleging that she had misused HOA funds during her tenure as president. The investigator wanted to know if I had any information about financial irregularities. I told him about the reimbursement requests I had seen in the discovery documents and suggested he contact Jennifer for copies of the HOA's financial records. I also mentioned that Brenda had likely paid for the repair to her Escalade out of pocket to avoid creating a paper trail, which might indicate she was aware that she was doing something wrong. The investigation took several months, but eventually, the findings were released. Brenda had submitted false reimbursement requests totaling over $8,000 during her time as president. She had claimed expenses for things like community beautification supplies that were never purchased, maintenance work that was never performed, and even meeting expenses for dinners at expensive restaurants that she had attended alone. She had also approved paying inflated rates to a landscaping company owned by her brother-in-law without disclosing the family relationship. The Arizona Department of Real Estate revoked her eligibility to serve on any HOA board in the state and referred the case to the Maricopa County Attorney's Office for potential criminal charges. The HOA also filed a civil lawsuit against her to recover the misappropriated funds. I found out later from Robert that Brenda and her husband had put their house up for sale and moved out of state before any criminal charges could be filed. The HOA recovered some of the money from the sale proceeds, but not all of it. As for me, life in Sagebrush Hills improved dramatically after Brenda left. Sandra turned out to be a reasonable HOA president who focused on actual community issues rather than petty violations. The new board members elected in the special election were equally sensible. They even revised some of the more ridiculous rules that Brenda had pushed through over the years. I ended up becoming friends with several neighbors, including Robert, James, and Sandra. We occasionally joked about the Great Fence incident. As it became known in the neighborhood, the fence itself stood as a reminder of how important it is to document everything and stand up for yourself when you are in the right. I never regretted installing those security cameras. That footage saved me thousands of dollars and exposed corruption that had been hurting the entire community. One Saturday afternoon, about 6 months after everything had settled, I was working in my backyard when Robert came over with a couple of beers. "You know, I have been thinking," he said, handing me one of the bottles. "If you had not fought back against Brenda, she would probably still be running this HOA into the ground. A lot of people are grateful you stood your ground." I took a sip of the beer and looked at the fence, which now stood straight and solid. I just did not want to pay for something I did not do. I never expected it to turn into all of that. That is the thing about bullies. They count on people backing down. You did not, and it made all the difference. We clinked bottles and sat in comfortable silence for a while, enjoying the desert evening. The whole experience taught me several valuable lessons about dealing with HOA disputes. First, documentation is everything. Without that video footage, it would have been my word against Brenda's, and as the HOA president, she had institutional credibility that I lacked. The camera captured objective evidence that could not be disputed. Second, do not expect reasonableness from unreasonable people. I wasted time in the beginning trying to resolve things amicably, writing polite letters and offering to share evidence. Brenda had no intention of being fair. She was committed to her version of events regardless of the facts. Recognizing that early and getting legal help sooner would have saved me some stress. Third, most HOA boards are not made up of villains. James, Sandra, and Marcus were good people who had been misled by someone they trusted. Once they saw the actual evidence, they did the right thing. It is important to remember that not everyone on the board is necessarily complicit in bad behavior. Some are just uninformed. Fourth, bullies in positions of power often have a history of abusing that power. Once the investigation into Brenda's finances began, it turned out she had been taking advantage of her position for years. My fence incident was just the tip of the iceberg. Standing up to that kind of corruption benefits everyone, even if it feels like a personal fight at the time. And finally, communities are generally self-correcting if given the chance. Once Brenda was removed and her misconduct exposed, the neighborhood came together to elect better leadership and fix the problems she had created. People genuinely want to live in well-run communities. They just need someone to break through the intimidation and inertia that keeps bad leaders in power. I also learned some practical tips about HOA living that I wish I had known before buying the house. I started reading the HOA covenants, conditions, and restrictions thoroughly, all 147 pages of them. I discovered that many of the rules Brenda had been enforcing were not actually in the governing documents. She had just made them up or had pushed through board resolutions without proper homeowner votes. The new board ended up rescinding a lot of those invalid rules. I also learned to attend HOA board meetings regularly. They were open to homeowners, and just having people show up kept the board accountable. After my experience, several other homeowners started attending too. The meetings became more transparent and focused on actual community needs rather than petty enforcement actions. The experience even affected my work life. I was a project manager for a software company, and the skills I used to fight the HOA dispute, documenting everything, building a clear case with evidence, staying calm under pressure, negotiating settlements, actually made me better at my job. I had a new appreciation for the importance of clear communication and objective evidence in resolving disputes. My girlfriend Amanda Tyler, who I had been dating for about a year when all this happened, was incredibly supportive throughout the whole ordeal. She lived across town in an apartment and was not directly affected by the HOA drama, but she listened to me vent, helped me organize documents, and even attended the board meeting where Brenda resigned. The experience actually brought us closer together because she saw how I handled a difficult situation with integrity. Amanda and I ended up getting engaged about a year after the fence incident settled. We had the engagement party in my backyard, right next to the rebuilt fence. It became a running joke among our friends. "Make sure nobody backs into that fence," Robert would say every time he saw it. "It has been through enough drama already." The party was great. Sandra and her husband came, as did James and his wife Marcus, and about 20 other neighbors. It felt like a real community, the kind of place I had hoped to find when I first moved to Sagebrush Hills. There was one awkward moment when someone asked whatever happened to the old HOA president. I gave a brief, diplomatic answer about how she had moved out of state. I did not mention the financial investigation or the potential criminal charges. It felt unnecessary to dwell on it. Brenda had faced consequences for her actions, and the community had moved on. As the sun set that evening and our friends and neighbors mingled in the backyard, Amanda squeezed my hand. "Happy?" she asked. "Very," I said. And I meant it. The fence stood quietly in the fading light, just another piece of the property. But to me, it represented something more. It was a reminder that standing up for what is right matters, that documentation and evidence can overcome lies and abuse of power, that communities can heal when bad actors are held accountable, and that sometimes the thing you think will be a nightmare turns out to be the beginning of something better. I never thought a fence could mean so much, but there it was. A few months later, I was grabbing coffee at a local shop when I ran into Gary Stevens, the attorney who had represented the HOA during the lawsuit. He looked uncomfortable when he recognized me. "Nathan, hey, how have you been?" "Pretty good," I said. "Everything worked out." He nodded, looking somewhat sheepish. "Listen, I want you to know that I did not have the full story when I was representing the HOA. Brenda showed me selected documents and gave me her version of events. If I had known about the video evidence up front, I would have advised her to settle immediately. Did you know about the financial stuff?" "No. That came out later. I stopped representing the HOA once the settlement was finalized, and I had no idea about any of that until I saw it in the news." He paused. "For what it is worth, I think you handled everything properly. A lot of people would have just paid the fines to avoid the hassle. You did the right thing fighting it." We chatted for a few more minutes and then went our separate ways. The interaction left me thinking about how many people get caught up in situations without full information. Gary had been doing his job based on what his client told him. The board members had been making decisions based on what Brenda told them. In a way, everyone had been operating in the dark until the evidence came to light. That is why documentation mattered so much. The security footage cut through all the confusion and competing narratives. It was objective reality, impossible to spin or reinterpret. It forced everyone to confront the truth. As time went on, the fence incident faded into neighborhood lore. New homeowners would move in and eventually hear the story, usually from Robert or Sandra, about the time the HOA president tried to frame a homeowner for damage she caused and ended up getting exposed for financial fraud. It became a cautionary tale about the importance of honest leadership and accountability. The HOA itself became a model of good governance under Sandra's leadership. She instituted new financial controls, including requiring board approval for any expenditure over $500 and quarterly financial reports to all homeowners. She also created a dispute resolution process so that homeowners could challenge violations before fines were imposed. The changes made the community more livable and reduced conflicts dramatically. I ended up serving on the Architectural Review Committee for a couple of years. It was voluntary, and I figured it was a good way to stay involved and make sure the committee remained reasonable. We approved paint colors, fence designs, and landscaping plans. It was surprisingly satisfying to help neighbors with their projects rather than creating obstacles for them. Amanda and I got married 2 years after the engagement in a small ceremony at a vineyard outside Phoenix. We kept living in the Sagebrush Hills house, which we both loved. The HOA drama had become ancient history by then, barely mentioned anymore. But I never took down the security cameras. They were still there, quietly recording just in case. Once you have seen how valuable objective evidence can be, you never want to be without it. One evening, maybe 3 years after the fence incident, I was sitting on my back patio with Amanda, watching the sunset paint the mountains pink and orange. The fence stood solid in the background, exactly as it should be. "You know what I was thinking about today?" Amanda said. "What?" "How different things could have been if you had not had that camera. Or if you had just decided to pay the fines and move on. I think about that sometimes too. I could have paid the $4,500 for the fence, avoided the legal fees, and just accepted the injustice of it. It would have been easier in the short term, but then Brenda would still be running the HOA, still bullying people, still stealing money." "Exactly. And I would have been teaching myself that it is okay to let people get away with that kind of thing. That was not a lesson I wanted to learn." Amanda smiled. "That is one of the things I love about you. You actually live by your principles, even when it costs you something." We sat there as the sky darkened and the first stars appeared. The desert air cooled, and I could hear the sound of kids playing in a nearby yard. Someone was grilling, and the smell of barbecue drifted over. It was a perfect, ordinary evening in a well-run community, and I had played a small part in making it that way. Looking back on the entire experience, from that first moment when I saw Brenda back into the fence on my phone screen to the final settlement and beyond, I realized that I had learned more than just lessons about HOA disputes. I had learned about courage, persistence, and the importance of truth. I had learned that institutions, even small ones like an HOA, rely on accountability to function properly. And I had learned that ordinary people, when pushed, can stand up to bullies and win. The fence was just a fence. But what it represented, the fight for fairness, the power of evidence, the importance of not backing down when you are right, that mattered. That was worth fighting for. And in the end, justice prevailed. The fence got fixed, the fines got removed, the corrupt HOA president got exposed and faced consequences, and the community became a better place. It was not the beginning I had hoped for when I bought my dream house in Scottsdale, but it was an ending I could be proud of. Sometimes life puts you in situations you never expected. You can either fold under the pressure or stand up for yourself. I chose to stand up, and it made all the difference. The fence still stands today, solid and straight, a testament to what happens when you refuse to be intimidated and insist on the truth. Every time I look at it, I remember the battle it represented and the victory that followed. And I smile, because I know I did the right thing. In the years that followed, I occasionally thought about what might have happened if things had gone differently. If Judge Ramirez had not granted the restraining order, if the board members had not turned against Brenda, if the financial investigation had not uncovered her fraud, any one of those factors could have changed the outcome, but they did not. The system worked, slowly and imperfectly, but it worked. Truth won out over lies. Evidence trumped false accusations. Justice, though delayed, eventually arrived. That is the story of how an HOA Karren demanded I pay for the shared fence she backed into, how my camera showed every second of what really happened, and how standing up for the truth changed an entire community for the better. It started with a fence and a video. It ended with accountability, justice, and a neighborhood that learned the importance of honest leadership. And through it all, I learned that sometimes the most important battles are the ones you never expected to fight. The fence stands as my reminder, and I am grateful for every lesson it taught me.